I am an illegitimate child. My mother is the president of a major pharmaceutical company. To prevent my younger brother from knowing about my existence, my mother gives me 100,000 yuan for living expenses every month. By the time I entered university, the amount increased to 300,000 yuan. The first time I met my brother was during the university freshman registration. I was in my third year and he was a freshman. My mother personally brought him there. She arrived in a Rolls-Royce Phantom. The moment it entered the campus, it blinded many people's eyes. The sleek, shiny black car body gleamed like a jewel under the sunlight. But even more dazzling than the Rolls-Royce was my mother's radiant, luxurious presence. She exuded an air of grandeur. My brother had the aura of a rich heir. And then there was Mr. Tong, with his elegant appearance. His name was Tong Baoqiang. He was incredibly impressive, but unfortunately, he was a rebellious one. His mother donated a biology laboratory to the school just to get him in. That's how he made it in. With his background, what need was there for hard work? His starting point was beyond the reach of many people's ultimate goals, even after generations. V. Yan, what are you standing there for? Isn't it your responsibility to greet? A classmate next to me nudged my arm. I snapped out of my daze, gathered myself together, and with the freshman list in hand, I smiled and walked toward the family of 3. My mother had already seen me. Earlier, she had glanced at me indifferently. Her gaze passed over me in just 0.1 seconds, as if she didn't recognize me. Now, as she looked at me, her eyelid twitched hard. Afraid I might call her mom. Hello, classmate Baoqiang. My name is Ziyan. We are in the same major. I'm your senior in the 3rd year. Today, I'm responsible for welcoming you. I stood in front of Tong Baoqiang, reaching out my right hand to him. He looked at me with a noble expression full of scrutiny. A few seconds later, he barely touched my hand with his fingertips, as if to save me face. I slightly raised an eyebrow, smiling at my mother and Mr. Tong. Hello, uncle and auntie, I said politely. I'll take you to the dormitory first. Let's put down the luggage. Throughout the entire process, whether it was Tong Baoqiang or his parents, they were merely spectators. Handling the luggage, making the bed, and paying the tuition were tasks for the servants. All I did was serve as a guide, occasionally lending a hand to the servants. The other 3 boys in the dorm initially stood awkwardly in a corner of the room, astonished by the grandeur of the Tong family. Eventually, they simply left. Once everything was done, Tong Baoqiang tilted his chin at me, giving orders with a sense of superiority. Hey, you there, he called out. Give me your WeChat. You'll run errands for me from now on. I was surprised by the hey. Even more surprised at how casually he asked someone to run errands. I couldn't help but glance at my mother. So this is the Tong family's upbringing? At the same time, I opened my WeChat QR code, handing it to Tong Baoqiang. Smiling, I said, Classmate Baoqiang, my name is Ziyan, not hey. You can call me Senior Z. If there's anything you don't understand, feel free to ask me. But take care of your own business. No one is going to run errands for you. He snorted through his nose, glared at me, and muttered under his breath, ungrateful. Just 2 years ahead of me. What's the big deal? It's not a big deal, I replied, suppressing my anger. I was the provincial science top scorer. 1, I didn't need a donated laboratory to get into this school. 2, I'm just the current president of the student council. Tong Baoqiang glared at me, about to lose his temper. But my mother quickly called out Baoqiang. Her long-held position of authority made her intimidating without the need for anger. I am an illegitimate child. My father is not the third party. He was the one wronged by my mother. Back then, my mother had just given birth to me. Both families were already discussing wedding details. But a wealthy young man laid eyes on my mother. With a gambler's heart, she decisively abandoned both my father and me to pursue the rich young man. She was beautiful, sweet-talking, and knew how to navigate situations. Among the many women vying for the young man's attention, she emerged victorious. From that point, my mother achieved social ascension. With the support of Mr. Tong, in just 10 short years, she, a university student majoring in education, transformed into the president of a pharmaceutical company. As for my father, a high school chemistry teacher, he was abandoned, suffering from emotional pain and shame. Finding a suitable woman to marry became almost impossible for him. Later on, he worked hard and raised me alone, giving up on the idea of getting married again. It wasn't until my second year of high school that my mother sought us out, claiming she wanted to make up for everything. She gave us 100,000 yuan every month. My father didn't refuse. He told my mother to transfer the money to me. One night, my mother called me. She said, "I'm sorry for what happened today. It must have been embarrassing for you." Bao Qiang has been spoiled by his father. He's developed quite the young master's arrogance. Don't take it to heart, my mother said. When did you become the student council president? Why didn't you tell me so I could celebrate? My mother asked, is the money enough? If it's not enough, just tell mom. She continued, Bao Qiang has never liked studying since he was young. You two are in the same major. If you get the chance, guide him a bit. What could I say? Was my mother trying to wash her hands of it? What kind of answer would be 100% correct here? Should I stay away from him or guide him? Only she knew. So I replied, if it happens to be within my capabilities, I'll do my best. Satisfied, she hung up. I opened WeChat. Since the evening, the young master of the Tong family had already sent me several voice messages. Is being the provincial top scorer so impressive? Is being the student council president so impressive? Theft? If I wanted to, I could throw 1,000,000 yuan, and you have to roll out of your position as student council president. Are you out of your mind? Daring to embarrass me in front of my mom? You made me get ... Finish that sentence. I guessed his parents had scolded him. You better come here right now, Neil, and say you're sorry. Then maybe I'll consider forgiving you. V. Yan, don't mistake my kindness for weakness. I've already given you a chance. Do you even realize what major you're in? With just one word from me, you'll never find a job for the rest of your life. Such arrogance and conceit. No wonder when we were assigning freshman receptions earlier. Even though everyone knew he was the heir to a pharmaceutical empire, not a single person was willing to receive him. I rubbed my temples, thinking how pitiful my mother was to have such a son. The young Master Tong should take some time to read history, learn how to behave as a person before he ends up ruining himself. I said, I'll make sure you understand reality. He cursed through gritted teeth. I called a former high school classmate of Tong Bao Qiang, a boy who was 1 year ahead of him. We had already spoken about the reception issue earlier, and he strongly advised that no one should accept such a hot potato. Li Ming, how much do you know about Tong Bao Qiang? Can you tell me more about him? He asked cautiously. Senior, you haven't been bullied by him, have you? Before I could answer, he began to spill the beans like water pouring out of a pot. I've said it before, whoever gets involved with him is doomed. He's pure trouble. Back when he was at our school, everyone knew who he was. Our school didn't have any bullies before, but after he arrived, everyone learned exactly what a bully was. He was an academic failure, yet he was always in the top 3 in his class. Except for the National College entrance exam, someone always did his homework, and someone let him copy during exams. If the answers were wrong or too troublesome, it was followed by a beating. Once, during an exam, he was caught cheating by the proctor. He was publicly criticized. Guess what happened next? On the 3rd day, that teacher was hit with over 10 durians, thrown so hard they ended up in the hospital. The ones who did it were street thugs. They were caught by the police, but they firmly insisted that they had attacked the teacher just because they didn't like him. Not a single word about Tong Bao Qiang. That was his entire high school experience. Whoever he liked, that girl had to break up with her boyfriend. If not, nothing would happen to the girl, but the boyfriend would be in trouble. He would throw their backpack down from the top of the building, shove things into their desk, like toads and snakes, dump food on them, or force them to jump into the swimming pool. Those were considered minor acts. In his second year of high school, he liked a girl from our class, but the girl had a boyfriend. Neither of them wanted to break up. Later, one evening after self-study, the boy was dragged to a construction site on his way home. Li Ming began to choke up. It took him a while to continue. The boy ended up staying in the hospital for a long time before being transferred to a mental hospital. He was my best friend. He was better academically than me, and he was a promising student in our class. He couldn't even take the college entrance exam. The person I hate the most in this life is Tong Baokyong, relying on his family's wealth. He thought he could get away with anything. I hung up the phone, my hand still resting on my forehead, never putting it down. Half a month later, after the freshmen returned from military training, the student unions of each department started to compile the list of applicants for new positions. I received a copy as well. I glanced through it casually, and to my surprise, I saw Tong Baokyong's name. He had applied for the academic department of our faculty. This department was responsible for organizing academic lectures and study forums, gathering information on the latest developments in various fields, hosting professional competitions, and awarding scholarships. I couldn't believe he had any interest in these things. Even less could I believe that he would be willing to serve his fellow students. My fingers tapped the list several times, but I didn't delete his name, nor did I call anyone to make any wise decisions. 3 days later, the departments announced the finalized list. Once again, I saw Tong Baokyong's name. So much for facing reality. But I was still quite surprised. From the freshman welcome meeting to the day of registration, Tong Baokyong hadn't left a good impression on anyone. Was our department's student union really planning to take on such a hot potato? The student union president of our department, Jo Ke, lived on the same floor as me, just 3 dorms away. I went straight to his room. "I knew you'd come," Joe said when he saw me, completely unsurprised. Tong Baokyong's application form was sitting at the top of a stack of forms. He handed it to me. "This thing is just tempting," he said. I discussed it with the other department heads. Bringing him in is more beneficial than harmful. He's just got a spoiled rich kid's attitude. We can tolerate it. I glanced at the application form. It was written in a typical formal business style. The language was precise and meticulous. It must have been written by a company secretary. The gist of it was that he would use his family's resources to invite industry authorities or pharmaceutical experts to give academic lectures every semester, at least twice. B, to share the latest developments and trends in the pharmaceutical industry collected by their company. 100, he would sponsor the department with an additional 300,000 yuan annually for scholarships and 300,000 yuan for student union activities. 500, he would provide at least 10 internship positions for the department each semester. This was practically a superpower. I looked at Jo Ke. His eyes were filled with excitement. I understood that if these promises were fulfilled, it would all count as his achievements. "Think it through before deciding," I said. "A wise man doesn't stand under a dangerous wall." Then I mentioned that, in principle, internal department matters wouldn't be interfered with. After that, I took a photo of Tong Baokyong's application and sent it to my mother. She replied half an hour later. "It's rare that he's showing ambition. Let him get some experience." It was the expected answer. I sent the photo to him as well. It was just a formality for a week. Life is like a stage. How far you go depends on how big your platform is. During the interview phase, Tong Baokyong didn't even show up. Yet he skipped over the intern and member roles and directly secured the position of deputy head of the academic department in the student union. In his class, this young master who skipped military training and rarely attended lectures, also became the deputy class monitor for academic affairs. On social media, he boasted, "Don't lower your head, or you'll lose your halo." He even tagged me specifically. What could I say? A person who needed favors just to get admitted, effortlessly used his family's resources and capital to get things others work for years to achieve. I didn't even feel like congratulating him. Tong Baekhyun wasn't satisfied. He messaged me directly on WeChat. 600,000 yuan, and I want your position. Will you give it or not? This was the funniest joke I had ever heard. Did he really think the student council president's position was something that could be bought and sold? Young Master Tong, I already told you. Read more history. Even in feudal societies, not every dynasty allowed people to buy and sell official positions. And as for my position, I decide who the next one will be. And about that 1 million you mentioned earlier, the chat window showed that he was typing for quite a while. After about 2 minutes, a short message came through. Deal. 1 million it is. You resign tomorrow. And make sure to give the position to me. I looked at the message and laughed for quite some time. Young Master Tong, go wash up and sleep early. In dreams, you can have anything you want. This is a university campus, not your mom's company. Tong Baekhyun was furious. He called me immediately. Ziyan, are you messing with me? It's just a student council president. Do you really think I care about it? I'm telling you, as long as I want to. Even the entire school could be mine. His voice was loud and sharp, so I held the phone a little farther from my ear. Young Master Tong, what are you talking about? Do you really believe money is almighty? I laughed as I spoke. This is a top-tier university. Do you think it's yours just because you say so? Go ask your mom. Is that even possible? Why wouldn't it be possible? He shouted, still sharp. I'm telling you, money is almighty. You lowly ants ... Do you hard work and physics will help you rise to the top? Rise to what? In what world? After graduation, won't you still end up working for people like me, the rich ones? Ziyan, you've challenged me time and time again. Remember this. I'll make you regret ever being born in this world. You'd better start preparing your coffin early. His voice was so loud that the others in the dorm could hear it. They looked at me with worried expressions. I glanced down at the recording I had just made and casually backed it up to 3 different cloud drives. Then I reassured my roommates. Don't worry, we live in a society ruled by law. He won't dare act recklessly. It's true that Tong Baekhyun wouldn't dare act recklessly himself. But he had money, and money could make others act recklessly on his behalf. One evening after our study session, my 3 roommates and I returned to the dorm. The moment we opened the door, there was a sudden whoosh. Something darted across the room. It was about the size of 2 fists. The student who had opened the door froze, his face visibly paling. Did you guys see that? Looked like a rat, he muttered. Yeah, I saw it, I replied calmly. Our dorm had never had a rat problem before. I pulled him aside a little, reached my hand inside, and flicked on the overhead light. Slowly, we stepped into the room. Rats aren't that scary, I said slowly. In a minute, we'll grab a basin and start banging it around. Maybe we can scare it out. I hadn't even finished speaking when everyone froze. The sound that followed was as loud as a car horn, but it sounded more like a cow, except ... it was eardrum rattling sound unmistakably came from behind a cabinet near the bottom bunk of one of my roommates. What is that? Should we call 119, or is this some kind of sign? Someone asked. I licked my lips before anyone else could respond. It's asterisk Mewe U2 asterisk bullfrog and fish head, I said. Bullfrogs are also called New Washington literally. Cow frogs. The looks like someone sent us in our dorm, upon hearing it was something edible, immediately forgot his earlier fear. The 4 of us, one grabbed a long broom, The other three grabbed basins, poking and blocking as we joyfully hunted the bullfrog in the dorm. We were having a blast catching the frog, since it was still a while before lights out. There was plenty of time for a late night snack. I haven't had *MEIWAU2 in so long. One of us said, "Me neither, let's order it up later." For pounds of frog, 2 pounds of fish head. Let's throw this one in. The shop owner shouldn't charge us extra. Hey, who sent us this bullfrog anyway? Why didn't they send a couple more? 20 minutes later, the four of us were carrying a shoebox filled with the bullfrog, walking out of the dorm. The poor frog was croaking softly inside the box. We didn't feel the least bit of sympathy. We were laughing and joking the whole way, and when we passed the dorm supervisor's room, I even waved and said hello. The dorm supervisor glanced curiously at the shoebox, but didn't ask any questions. We soon arrived at the hot pot restaurant, and the owner enthusiastically agreed to prepare the frog for us. The frog was quickly gutted and cleaned. I stood by taking pictures, especially when the frog's delicate, pale body was laid out on the tray after the skin was removed. Someone was probably still waiting on the other end of WeChat, eager to see me frustrated and angry. But I wasn't in a hurry. Even though he had specifically sent me a picture of a bullfrog with its mouth wide open, as if welcoming spring, he asked me if I had been eaten by the frog. I didn't reply. It wasn't until the *MEIWAU2 was served that I picked a piece of frog, dipped it into my sauce, arranged it nicely, and took one last picture. Then I sent the entire sequence of photos from catching the frog to cooking and eating it to Tong Beokyung. Sorry, I messaged. I ate him. Next time, send more. This wasn't enough. Tong Beokyung responded with a string of furious emojis. Ziyin, just you wait. I simply replied, and didn't check my phone again. Knowing that Tong Beokyung was fuming on the other end, puffing up in anger, made that late night snack all the more satisfying. When discussing the whole Tong Beokyung situation with her student council drama director, I casually brought it up. He gave me a quick answer. Hey, he's just here to get a degree. It won't be too much of a mess. As long as he graduates smoothly, that's enough. I've heard he's quite the troublemaker. I added, if you can handle it, it's not really trouble. On the weekend, while my roommates went shopping or on dates, I, a lifetime solo, had little interest in typical activities. I spent the entire day in the library. By evening, I left the library, had a bowl of rice noodles at the cafeteria, and then made my way back to the dorm. As fate would have it, when I reached the corner of our floor, I saw my roommate. Zichong had returned. He was holding a bowl of *swan la fun hot and sour noodles in one hand, and using the other hand to unlock the door. Zichong, I called out his name. He responded, just about to turn his head, when his face suddenly twisted into an expression of absolute terror. He stumbled backward, dropping the *swan la fun onto the floor with a splat. The entire floor echoed with his hysterical scream. I rushed over and saw a cauliflower snake coiled on the door frame. It was as thick as a wrist, with yellow and green stripes, dangling all the way down from the top of the door lock. Its neck stretched out, tongue flickering in and out. Its small, black bead-like eyes were locked on me. Snake! Snake! Students around us started shouting, backing away in fear. I wasn't particularly afraid of snakes. I had been bullied so much as a child that to survive, I had toughened up over the years, eventually becoming the village's little tyrant. Catching snakes and frogs was no big deal for me. This snake was non-venomous, known as the clip snake in some parts of the country. I shifted my body to the left, and the snake's head followed, turning left as well, its little beady eyes fixed on me. With my right hand, I pressed its head to the ground, then grabbed its neck with my left hand. With my right hand, I gripped its tail, twisting it up and securing it, holding both its neck and tail tightly in my left hand. The sound of people gasping surrounded me. The looks in their eyes were filled with admiration, almost overflowing. I glanced inside the dorm room, instinctively sensing that there might be more snakes inside. So I closed the door, tossed the snake aside, and called someone to come and catch the remaining snakes in front of everyone. I grabbed the snake and marched straight toward Tong Baokyung's dorm. The dorm door was slightly ajar. I could hear Tong Baokyung's coming from inside. His tone was high-pitched, and I didn't know who he was talking to. Last time, he ate a frog. I don't believe it. This time, let's see if he can eat a snake. Damn it. Doesn't know how to appreciate a favor. It'd be best if the snake strangled him to death. He laughed, ha ha ha. That scene would be too beautiful. I can't wait to see it. His tone then shifted to a sarcastic sneer. Senior, did you get the gift? Do you like it? Just as he finished speaking, my phone buzzed. I didn't need to guess who had sent the message. I kicked the door open. Tong Baokyung, who was leaning casually against the desk, jumped in surprise, especially when he saw the snake in my hand. His face instantly turned as white as a sheet. What are you going to do? His tongue seemed to twist as he stammered, backing away continuously. Don't come any closer. I smiled at him mockingly, deliberately slowing my steps. Tong Baokyung was trembling, looking at me like I was a demon. He was as frightened as a startled quail. Don't do anything crazy. Senior, I know I was wrong. I really know I was wrong. How much do you want? I'll give you anything, everything. He kept retreating, till his back was pressed against the balcony's cement railing. I grabbed the snake's tail with my right hand, and as my left hand released its grip, I swung my right hand forcefully. The snake lashed straight towards Tong Baokyung. He let out a loud cry, throwing his arms up to shield his face. The upper half of the snake smacked hard against his arm. One strike after another. I had no intention of stopping. I wielded that snake like a whip. He quickly curled up on the ground, sobbing, Ziyan, you'll pay for this. My mom is, he barely started the sentence before I whipped him on the top of his head with the snake. I don't care who your mom is, she can't save you. Don't think that having some filthy money lets you do whatever you want. Tong Baokyung, has no one ever told you that you'll pay for your evil deeds? You've been bullying and hurting others for so many years. It's about time someone taught you a lesson. As his cries turned into sobs, the once firm and thick snake now lay limp. I tossed it aside and turned to walk out. Tong Baokyung, I'm warning you, don't mess with me. You can't afford to. Why? He asked weakly as I reached the door. I paused because someone with nothing to lose fears no one with everything. Later, the police officers from Station 19 came to our dorm and found two snakes, and another one in the room next door, including the one I threw in Tong Baokyung's room. There were 4 in total. Soon, officers from Station B10 arrived too. They, along with the school's security office, checked the surveillance footage. It didn't take long for them to discover that the dorm supervisor was the one who planted the snakes. She had the keys to every dorm on our floor. Taking advantage of the early morning when she was cleaning the hallway, she unlocked our dorm door and slipped in a snakeskin bag clearly filled with live creatures. When she left, the bag was already flattened and empty. The police were taking her to the station for questioning. Standing amidst the crowd, I suddenly asked, were you the one who left the bullfrog last time too? How much did Tong Baokyung pay you? I asked the dorm supervisor. Do you know this could leave you with a criminal record? The dorm supervisor's eyes darted nervously, desperate to explain. Who's Tong Baokyung? I don't know him. The crowd around us chuckled in disbelief. Tong Baokyung was so notorious. There were probably only a handful of people in the entire school who didn't know him. The dorm supervisor continued to defend herself. There are so many people living in this building. How could I know who everyone is? How could anyone know who's who? No one said a word in response. The security guard glanced at the dorm supervisor with a hint of pity in his eyes. The dorm supervisor grew even more frantic, completely unaware of what she had said wrong. That's when the police officer spoke up. That student never said that Tong Baokyung lived in this building. The dorm supervisor's face filled with regret. That day, it wasn't just the dorm supervisor, but also Tong Baeokyung and all of us from our dorm who were taken to the police station. The dorm supervisor stubbornly insisted that both the snake and the bullfrog were her doing. She claimed she couldn't stand my arrogance and wanted to teach me a lesson, saying it had nothing to do with Tong Baeokyung. I pulled out the chat logs. Both the bullfrog and the snake were sent around the same time as the provocative messages from Tong Baeokyung. Everyone in my dorm agreed to press charges for intentional harm against both Tong Baeokyung and the dorm supervisor. This kind of thing, once investigated, would undoubtedly reveal the truth. Of course, Tong Baeokyung denied everything and even threatened to sue me for using a snake to hit him, claiming it was also intentional harm. Later, both my mother and Mr. Tong arrived at the police station. They rushed to check on Tong Baeokyung, feeling heartbroken and distressed over his injuries. My mother called out sharply, "Ziyan." I looked at her, and with a slightly raised tone, I asked, "So it's fine for him to bully me, but I'm not allowed to hit him?" Mr. Tong glanced oddly at my mother, then gave me a brief, indifferent look. He said nothing. I, of course, pretended not to notice. A man's suspicion is like a seed. Once planted, it starts to grow. Eventually, it turns into a towering tree. We spent a long time at the police station that day trying to mediate. The final outcome was, since no serious harm had been done, though the dorm supervisor had violated the public security regulations, she was sentenced to 12 days of detention. The Tong family compensated each of us in the dorm 5,000 yuan for replacing our bedding and other items. As for me hitting Tong Baeokyung, that was the end of it. Later that night, my mother called me. Her anger had cooled down, but she asked why I hit Tong Baeokyung, saying I had been too harsh. I walked to a quiet corner in the hallway and said, "Mom, he's your son. But am I not your son too? Why don't you ask him why he tried to hurt me?" "It was just a few snakes," she replied, her words far too dismissive. Her tone showed her displeasure. I leaned against the wall and coldly chuckled, "Mom, you've been in power for so long. You've forgotten that a cauliflower snake is also known as the king snake. When fully grown, they reach up to 2 meters long, about as thick as my wrist. Though non-venomous, they're called the king of all snakes. Once they wrap around their prey ... it's strangulation. You're grateful for what happened today. Thankfully, we discovered the snakes in the evening. If it had been during the night, and those snakes had come out, it wouldn't have just been a matter of 1 or 2 lives. If someone had died, would the dorm supervisor still cover for Tong Baeokyung? Could she even manage to? A life lost is far different from mental illness. When I mentioned mental illness, I could sense my mother's tension over the phone. "What have you heard?" she asked urgently. "Mom, if you don't want others to know, then don't do it in the first place." I spoke slowly with a hint of nonchalance. To put it bluntly, Baeokyung just needs discipline. Even if uncle is too soft-hearted to discipline him, me giving him a few beatings to curb his arrogance, isn't that a good thing? My mother was silent for 2 seconds. "But you hit him too hard." She still tried to scold me, but her tone had softened noticeably. "If I didn't hit him hard, he wouldn't remember it," I replied, then added sincerely, "After all, I'm his brother. Even though we're not from the same father, blood is still thicker than water." It might have seemed harsh, but I was measured. He'll just suffer a bit of physical pain. Getting beaten by me now is better than being taught a harsher lesson by someone else later in life. Just the other day, he even said that if he wanted, our whole school would be his. That last sentence seemed to strike a nerve with my mother. She erupted on the other end of the phone. "Ridiculous, utterly ridiculous." I remained silent for a long pause. She finally remembered to ask about me. "How did you learn to catch snakes?" I trained, I said. "Mom, I didn't have a mom when I was young. My dad worked in the city. He left me in the countryside. Other kids bullied me. Rats, snakes, toads, centipedes. They often slipped those into my bag. What could I do? I had no backing. No one stood up for me. How many times was I bitten? How many times was I poisoned? I can't even remember. They were fierce, so I had to be fiercer. Later, not only could I catch snakes, I could also handle toads with ease. Sometimes I even wondered, with all the poison I endured, had I become immune to all toxins? My dad brought me back to the city. That year, I was the top in the village. All the kids from every household called me Big Brother. When I left, the village chief even set off fireworks to celebrate. My mom listened in silence. Why didn't you come looking for me? He asked, do you even know who you are? I laughed, carefree, with a hint of mockery. And even if I did come for you, would you dare to acknowledge me? My mom fell silent once again. I rolled my eyes in the night. This was a form of psychological warfare for a person like her, with a past like that. Could her heart even be wounded? The next day, my bank account had 200,000 yuan more. My mom's secretary transferred the money for that bullied childhood. In her eyes, 200,000 yuan was enough to make up for it. I took the money and went to the luxury mall. I bought a branded watch, 3 outfits, 2 pairs of shoes, a necklace, spent over 200,000 yuan. After that, everything just fell into place. Tong Baoqiang had always paid more attention to me than others. I was always modest. These few luxury items, in his eyes, were particularly eye-catching. Ziyan, you wouldn't be out there selling yourself, would you? These things aren't something a poor student like you can afford. Tong Baoqiang deliberately cornered me after class, blocking me at the classroom door, and said loudly, none of your damn business. I leaned against the door, head lowered. I lightly brushed the expensive watch a couple of times, then shot him a glance. Young Master Tong, are you jealous? Tong Baoqiang let out a cold snort. Poor people's luxury. Z, the big president. You've probably never seen what real wealth looks like, have you? I'll give you a chance to see it. I replied casually. Sure, flaunting wealth is something only the rich can do. Tong Baoqiang would go home every few days and drive a different luxury car to school. He turned the school into his personal catwalk. Some classmates even kept track. In just a month, he drove 8 different cars. 6 of them were sports cars. None were priced below 3 million. Many classmates posted about it on their social media. Tong Baoqiang, of course, had plenty of free time. He gathered 8 screenshots from social media posts, plus a picture of him standing in front of a helicopter, making a 9-grid collage. The helicopter was in the center, surrounded by the screenshots. He captioned it, if the school didn't ban helicopters, I'd have flown one here. The classmates outwardly flattered him. Poverty limits my imagination. Oh my god, the Tong family is filthy rich. The cars at their place could be a luxury car show. But behind his back, they whispered, young master of a soon-to-be listed company. TSK, their industry basically monopolizes them, right? Making money off the sick is easy. So many people struggle to afford treatment. They can't even afford to see a doctor. Every time the state talks about adding drugs to the insurance list, they have to negotiate with companies like his. If their money was actually used to save lives, it wouldn't be so bitterly resented. I can't figure out Tang's mentality. Companies like that should stay low-key. What's there to show off? Are they flaunting how many lives they've profited from? I listened in silence. Occasionally, I'd buy another luxury item or 2 on weekends. Tong Baoqiang was convinced I had found myself a sugar mommy. He frequently mocked me in public, with no shortage of sneers. I calmly said my mom gave it to me. That's not illegal. He laughed hysterically. Ha ha ha, Ziyan, you're too much. Must have found yourself some rich old woman, huh? Want me to dig her up for you? I looked at him with pity, shook my head. Tong Baoqiang, who didn't like studying, didn't understand that when something is legendary, it will shine. Nor did he understand that wines rise at the end of dynasties. Every time he flaunted his wealth, it mirrored every instance of tyranny, every reckless action of a fading dynasty. It was sheer poverty. And the wines will always rise. When Tong Baeokyung got a position in the student council, the one who regretted it the most was Jo Ke, our department's student council president. At first, Tong Baeokyung gave him some internal industry documents for circulation. He mass emailed them to all class monitors, and the monitors forwarded them down. Confidential material. The company they sent it to contacted them directly. It was him who vouched for it. It was him who wrote the self-criticism. He almost got sued. If it had gone to court, it would have been him, too. Tong Baeokyung, on the other hand, raised the matter high and let it fall lightly. Then he arranged for an expert lecture. For that, all Tong Baeokyung provided was the expert's contact info. It was Jo Ke who did all the running around. When the lecture finally ended, that evening, they invited the expert to dinner. With just one sentence, Tong Baeokyung offended the expert. It was Jo Ke who had to apologize and make amends again. The worst part was, while Jo Ke was busy cleaning up Tong Baeokyung's mess, Tong Baeokyung stole Jo Ke's girlfriend. And he flaunted it proudly. "What do you have?" "I've got money." In mid-November, it was my 22nd birthday. My mom had reserved a table at a French restaurant, said she wanted to celebrate my birthday there. After class, I went back to the dorm, put on some stylish clothes, and called a luxury car service to head to the restaurant, barely a street away from the school. I saw the dazzling sports car trailing behind. It was Tong Baeokyung. He was tailing me like the fool he was. I lowered my head and texted a long-term partner. Told him which table I was at for dinner. He sent back an okay gif. Half an hour later, I walked into the French restaurant. My mom had arrived as well. She was dressed head to toe in expensive attire. Her high heels made a click, click, click sound as they hit the floor. Honestly, she looked stunning. A woman in her 40s with an air of restraint, but with a touch of femme fatale charm. I knew Tong Baeokyung was hiding in some corner, watching. I also knew he was stomping his foot in frustration, a small volcano ready to erupt. Aside from greeting her and adding, "You look really beautiful today," I made no other moves. I sat properly across from her. But I knew it was enough. The birthday cake with lit candles was pushed out by the waiter. My mom personally placed a shining birthday crown on my head and softly sang me the birthday song. I imagined Tong Baeokyung's twisted face not far away, and the argument that was bound to happen in half an hour. I happily made my wish. Blowing out the candles, she asked, "What did you wish for?" I replied, "I hope mom and dad stay healthy, and I hope that every year on my birthday, at least one of you is by my side, and I hope dad remarries soon." My mom's expression dimmed for a moment, but she quickly returned to normal, handing me the birthday gift she had prepared. "Ziyan, mom hopes you grow up happy and strong." I believe she meant that sincerely. I had come with a purpose. But at that moment, hearing her say "grow up happy," my nose suddenly stung. Growing up means being able to be small, to be weak, to have someone to rely on. But since I was very young, I had learned to handle everything on my own, as if I was born strong. I sniffed, walked over and gently hugged my mom. In the next moment, Tong Baeokyung stormed in like a gust of wind, like a fireball bursting through the restaurant door. Following closely behind was Mr. Tong. He wore gold-rimmed glasses, a gray shirt, and a matching diagonally striped tie. His posture was impeccably straight. I tactically stepped back. Tong Baeokyung had backup, ignoring the crowded restaurant, ignoring his identity as a young master. He pointed at me, shouting hoarsely, "Ziyan, you scumbag! How dare you seduce my mom?" My mom's gaze swept over Tong Baeokyung and landed on Mr. Tong. A flash of panic crossed her face. Tong Beokyung, still young and hot-headed, in a few strides had already charged forward. He grabbed the watch box from the table, took out the Rolex inside, and angrily hurled it at me. I could have dodged, but I didn't. There were too many onlookers here. The more arrogant he acted, the more I needed to appear weak. In contrast, I pretended to be startled, stumbled back half a step, raised my hand to shield my face. The metal watch skimmed across the back of my hand, leaving a long, deep cut. Blood instantly poured out. I wanted to call out Mom, but no sound came out. I just opened my mouth, glanced at Mr. Tong, and forcefully swallowed the word. I looked down, tears streaming down my face. This pretty boy. Mr. Tong looked at me with disdain. I had a bad feeling that day. Didn't he start flirting with her at the start of the semester? Of course. It must have been that day when Tong Beokyung, interrupting and acting all high and mighty at school, top scorer of the college entrance exam, student council president, and still looking down on me? In the end, what did you amount to? You're just out here selling yourself. Even selling yourself to my mom. Each harsh word made my pupils constrict sharply. The restaurant grew quieter. Some people had their phone cameras pointed in our direction. You think you can even covet my mom? Tong Beokyung stood with his hands on his hips, overbearing as ever. Mom, I looked at my mom, mouthing the words, should I tell him I'm your son? But before I could, I received my mom's fiercest warning. Her gaze was enough for me to understand instantly. She would rather I carry the shame of being called a cheap gigolo than let her husband know I was her son. Of course, a successful woman. If she had a man on the side, it was just a game. Something physical, not emotional. It would pass. But if she had once had a fiancé, and for the sake of wealth, for a bright future, to avoid 50 years of struggle, she abandoned her fiancé and her newborn child, that was a different matter entirely. It would mean their marriage was built on lies. Mr. Tong was already convinced that I was her lover. He was sure my mom had betrayed him. He advanced on her, step by step, spitting, you piece of trash. If it hadn't been for me, you wouldn't even know where you'd be begging right now, with your little bit of skill. You think you could be a company president? Stop dreaming. And now you dare to keep a pretty boy behind my back? Liu Ryan, are you even human? Tong Beokyung, standing to the side, added fuel to the fire, rolling his eyes so hard they nearly reached the sky. My mom looked mortified, hunched over, whispering, dear, let's talk about this at home. At this moment, all the prestige, all the air of a company president meant nothing. She was merely Mr. Tang's lapdog. I glanced toward the door. Once again, the door of the French restaurant was pushed open. A young man in a black hoodie, a baseball cap pulled low over his head, and a face mask covering his face, walked in. His hands were in his pockets. No one in the restaurant noticed him. Everyone's attention was focused on the unfolding drama at our table. He quickly approached and handed a stack of photos to my mom. Ms. Liu, here's what you asked me to investigate. I didn't ask you to. My mom didn't finish her sentence, her eyes drawn to the contents of the photos. In a nightclub, Mr. Tong was surrounded by young women, laughing wildly. My mom frantically flipped through the photos. There was one of Mr. Tong dancing with the nightclub's top hostess, next to him gifting her a gold chain. It looked like it was her birthday. The next photo, even more incriminating. Whether or not a woman has cheated, loyalty from a man is something she holds dearly, especially after Mr. Tang's recent harsh insults, saying she was incompetent, that she relied on men. My mom had been suppressing her anger, but at that moment, she could no longer hold it in. To hell with her image. She lost it, grabbing the stack of photos and slamming them into Mr. Tang's face. You bastard, look at the mess you've made. Take a good look at yourself. The photos scattered everywhere, falling like snowflakes onto the floor. Mr. Tong never imagined that all these years of casual flings with different women, physical without emotional attachment, had been recorded by someone. You hired someone to investigate me? Mr. Tong was furious, his voice shaking. What gives you the right to investigate me? What makes you think you have that kind of authority? His gaze fell back on the photos. Most of the photos were of him, but a few were of my mom. It turned out my mom did have other men. Not just one, but several. In that moment, nightclub girls, company employees, Miss Liu, and Mr. Tong tangled in a chaotic mess. The young man who delivered the photos had already left. Tong Baoqiang never dreamed that the two pillars of strength he relied on, what he thought was a harmonious family, was nothing more than an illusion. He stood there, terrified and helpless, like an abandoned puppy, until his gaze fell on me. It was you, wasn't it? Tong Baoqiang's voice was low. He wasn't certain, but he needed someone to blame for his burning rage. Hatred filled his eyes to the brim, barely contained. I'll kill you, he suddenly roared, grabbing a fork from the table and lunging at me. Unfortunately for him, he overestimated his fighting skills and underestimated me. Even with an injured hand, I was more than capable of handling him. The moment he lunged, I screamed and dodged out of the way. I hooked my foot, accidentally tripping him at the ankle. He fell face first to the ground like a dog eating dirt, howling in pain. The farce in the French restaurant quickly made it to the local trending topics that night. Due to my mom's and Mr. Tang's prominent status, and the sheer embarrassment of the situation, the story exploded in popularity. My mom must have paid to try and remove it from the trending list, but it couldn't be suppressed. It spread beyond Weibo, to news apps, video platforms, and across countless QQ and WeChat groups. The power of the masses is immense. Some people dug up that Mr. Tong spent lavishly at nightclubs, throwing money on the top hostess, spending a fortune in gold. He even gifted luxury cars and mansions. Others uncovered that my mom built her fortune through her husband, taking over his family's business, but being unfaithful to him. Then someone exposed my identity. A third-year student at a pharmaceutical university, a student leader and top performer. There were even alleged insiders from the pharmaceutical industry, most likely from a competitor, claiming my mom's company was mismanaged, with bribery and corruption rampant among the leadership. The insults poured in. Some even found my Weibo, cursing out my ancestors for 18 generations, with the most venomous words imaginable. Only Tong Baoqiang seemed like the innocent victim, watching helplessly as both his parents betrayed each other. That night, countless people called me. There were current and former school leaders, teachers, classmates, and even my dad. Some asked what had happened. I told them, it's not what you think. Some people advised me to stay offline for a while. Don't look at those nasty comments, they said. The truth will clear itself up. But there were also those angrily asking over the phone, why hasn't someone like Tong Baoqiang gotten rid of you yet? Even my dad asked why I didn't clear things up. I told him, just wait a few more days. There's only so much fuel for the fire. Once it's all burned, there'll be nothing left. Yes, it was true the young man who delivered the photos was hired by me. On the way to the French restaurant, he was the one I had texted. For years, I'd been using the money my mom gave me to hire someone to investigate her and her husband. The next day, when the stock market opened, Tang's pharmaceutical company's stock plummeted. In less than 3 hours, it hit the lower limit, a 20% drop on the startup board. Pharmaceutical stocks had been more prone to falling than rising in recent years, and with this 20% drop, the shareholders were in an uproar, raining insults all around. My mom and Mr. Tong urgently held a press conference, claiming the company's management had no issues, and that the rumors of bribery and corruption were baseless. They invited the public to supervise. At the same time, they flaunted their love on social media, declaring that their marriage was fine, that they had forgiven each other. They wouldn't leave or forsake each other, and would weather this crisis together. On the third day, the stock slightly recovered, rising by 0.1%. On the fourth day, it dropped 3%. By the fifth day, the weekend had arrived. I figured the Tong family was probably relieved. The stock market closing was the perfect breather for them. In this economic era, the public's attention span is limited. The root of their crisis this time lay in the scandalous affair. The claims of chaotic management lacked solid proof. A significant portion of the capital flight was due to emergency risk aversion. Once the situation blew over, with a wave of positive news for the company, the stock prices could soon stabilize, maybe even return to normal. On Saturday night, a short video titled "The Life of a Rich Young Master You Wouldn't Expect" went viral on Douyin. The protagonist was none other than Tong Baoqiang. The video was just over 2 minutes long. It opened with clips of him switching 8 luxury cars in 1 month. Then there was the photo of him standing next to the helicopter. His boast on social media: "If it weren't such a hassle to land helicopters at school, I would have flown one in." Then came clips of his mom pulling strings to get him into university, and him buying his way into the student council. There were even screenshots of his chat records with Zhou Ke and others, where he flaunted the power of money. "Why study? You'll just end up working for me." His blatant words appeared in the chat box. Next was footage of police officers coming to our dorm to catch snakes, with a voiceover saying the rich young master tried to bribe the student council president. When the president refused, he had someone release snakes as a threat. The comments section exploded. After hundreds of insults, some sharp-eyed users in detective mode noticed the last scene, featuring a male supporting character from the French restaurant incident. It was me, front and center. Speculation arose that CEO Liu had treated me to dinner and gifted me a watch, possibly as an apology on behalf of her son. Others guessed ... Tong Baoqiang released the snakes because he found out I was his mom's lover. But none of that really mattered. What mattered was that this video went viral, and it reignited the news from a few days ago about the CEO couple's private scandal. This video wasn't something I had orchestrated. I guessed it was Zhou Ke, but I didn't mind adding fuel to the fire. I opened the comments section on Weibo and reposted a comment that tagged me, cursing at me. "Sorry, she really is my mom. I just had dinner with my biological mother." Then I posted a separate photo of the paternity test report, back when my mom found my dad. She didn't immediately acknowledge me as her son. She was thorough in her approach, quietly pulling some of my hair, and only after the paternity test came back positive did she finally accept me. I bought some traffic for this Weibo post and attached the paternity test report under the viral video. The gossip-hungry masses' curiosity flared up again. I was 2 years older than Tong Baoqiang. My mom preferred letting people think I was some gigolo rather than clearing things up. She didn't want the Tong family to know I was her son. What lies beneath the surface of the iceberg is far larger than what's visible. People who knew the truth from back then started spilling details about how my mom, in her quest to climb the social ladder, abandoned her fiancé and her newborn child. As for Tong Baoqiang, people he had bullied over the years, and those who had witnessed him bullying others, all started coming forward like mushrooms after the rain. One by one, speaking out. They exposed everything Tong Baoqiang had done over the years. Photos, recordings, videos, texts. They had it all. Especially the boy who had been dragged to the construction site and whipped. His family, his friends, his younger brother, his lover, and his classmates all stepped forward. Every word they spoke was a blood-soaked accusation. At that moment, public outrage reached its peak. People's anger toward the privileged who commit crimes with impunity boiled over. Then came Monday. The stock market reopened. Within an hour, Tang's pharmaceutical company's stock hit the lower limit again. In just 1 week, its stock price was cut in half. My mom, as the company's president, was ousted by the shareholders for mismanagement. Mr. Ting's father stepped in to take control of the company again. That same day, the judiciary announced that the old case from the construction site was being reopened. Later, my mom was divorced, kicked out of the Tong family, and left with nothing. Tong Bao-kyung was sent to prison that winter. The world was a vast expanse of snow. Mr. Tong stood before me. "You did all this," he said. "You ruined your mother and brother. Doesn't your conscience hurt?" I tightened the collar of my down jacket, smiled, and replied, "No, it doesn't." "And what about you, when you were with my mom back then? Did you really not know she had a fiancé? Wasn't your son's arrogance and entitlement a product of your indulgence?" "Uncle, every cause has an effect. The seeds you planted. Naturally, you should bear the consequences." As for my mom and Bao-kyung, the net of justice is vast, but it never misses its mark. I turned and walked away. The wind swirled through the falling snow, sweeping past the treetops, and as it passed through the buildings, the snow grew even heavier.